Welcome everyone. This video will go through how do you create a transcription protocol for qualitative interviews. It is actually an important thing to consider. Not many researchers or students may think about until you start doing qualitative interviews, and then you come across different things that you need to think about. So hopefully by the end of this video, you will, I'll convince you about why it is very crucial and important to do a transcription protocol for your qualitative interviews before you start. The material taken, and I'm grateful for the authors who published this material, and for the material itself, it's taken from a resource by McQueen, and Needing, and it's called Beyond the Qualitative Interview, Data Preparation and Transcription, published in Field Methods in 2003, and I included the DOI and other article details for you to search and read. So before I give more details, I would talk about the key considerations that you need to think about before starting your interviews, whether it is individual or group. So what sort of things do you need to think about? First of all, the transcription method. Are you going to use online services, in-person services, or others, individual services, things like, for example, are you going to use certain online services like, say, Microsoft Teams, Otter, and so on? And the second thing to consider is settings. Are you including only language observations or linguistic observations, or are you including also non-linguistic observations such as body language, facial expressions, and other setting descriptions? So think about that. Are you only including the language, the text, what people say, or are you including other things as well? For example, is body language important for you to include as part of your study and investigation or not, and so on? The third thing to consider is what to include. So are you including any mispronunciations, any slang, any grammatical errors that participants or yourself make, any nonverbal sounds like laughs, sirens, and so on? So that is another thing that is important to consider. A fourth point to consider is the transcription level and depth. So are you transcribing the tapes or your transcripts in full? Your interviews in full? This is important to consider because analysis is really focused on providing in-depth description of whether it is, knowledge, attitudes, values, beliefs, or experiences of individuals or a group of individuals. So it's important to think about whether you're transcribing in full or not. Another thing to consider is any unexpected events. So, for example, any changes to audio tape type that you're using that might affect the sound and how you hear the transcripts. Any changing in interview settings or group settings, any IT issues that you come across, and how are you going to deal with these in the transcripts? So this is something, again, that is important to consider. Another thing to consider is file naming and storage. So how are you going to save your transcripts, and how are you going to name your transcripts? Are you going to, for example, save one that says formatted, another copy perhaps that says unformatted, interview, and so on? Also, what is the format of your transcripts? Each transcript needs to be identical. So you need to really think about your format. You can't just keep jumping between different formats because that indicates really sloppiness and and really you might end up even confusing yourself and not remembering what sort of format did you use, the changes that you made, and why did you make the changes, and so on. So it's a really important way of keeping you grounded is to use transcripts that are identical in format as much as you can. Unless obviously there are changes that you make to the transcription services, because each transcription service might differ from each other. Another thing to consider is confidential information. So how are you going to deal with highly sensitive information? Are you removing these, replacing these with words? Also consider special software data security. So confidential information such as names, addresses, building numbers, how are you replacing these? And in terms of the special, that point was related to the confidential information. So how are you going to consider the names, the addresses, the other type of information that could be sensitive and needs to be anonymized? Special software data security. So are you using any special software? For example, are you using NVivo for qualitative research to do your analysis? How are you saving the data? For example, in my research, I use NVivo to do certain type of analysis of my results, but I use the formatted anonymized text. So all the details, all the confidential information were removed and not saved on NVivo. Another thing to consider is indecipherable words. So if words are indecipherable, or for example, two participants talking, or you and the participant talking at the same time, how are you going to address this in your transcript? So are you using, for example, crosstalk as a way to indicate where two people were talking? And then the final point to consider is change in the speaker. So time will be used, for example, how do you use, are you going to use time to indicate changes in questions or the moving between two different participants, and so on. Now we come to an important point to consider in transcripts is text formatting considerations. And I've got here an example of some of the formatting that you could use. But again, it's up to you to consider, because you could be, yourself or other participants suffering from certain types of, in a way that you prefer certain types of formats to be used for your transcripts. But here is an example of the stuff that you need to think about. For example, the points. Are you using, for example, what type of writing and size are you using of the words itself? The names, can you do them in italics or bold, or perhaps a color? Can you use color to indicate a change in questions? Consider things like, for example, the pagination of how the pages are set up in terms of the top, bottom, right, and left margins. Are all text going to be on the left with no indents? Again, this is assumed for English language. Other languages could be, the text could be on the right side, or from top to bottom, and so on. And also in terms of, are you using justification for the entire document, and so on. So it looks, in a way, this is, again, a way of formalizing the transcripts, so they look all identical, similar, presentable, and professional. Now, labeling of transcripts, another thing to consider. And I'll give some examples and things to think about when it comes to labeling of transcripts. Are you using sample ID? Some suggest using things like SO1 and if they are, say, numbered or as a way of numbering samples. Think about participants' pseudonym. What sort of pseudonyms do you want? Some participants might prefer to pick their own names. Are you using this method or are you choosing yourself? Is there a method that could make it easier for you but harder at the same time for other people to recognize the participants? All in all, choosing any pseudonym should be designed to steer away from identifying participants. Think about the interview name. What do you want to call the interview itself? Think about any categories, interview category, subgroups, where the interview sits or your interviews would sit under. Think about the site, the location. Think about de-identifying them from your transcripts. Think about the date of the interview as something to include. And the last two things to think about are the interviewer ID. Are you using your own ID? And also the transcriber ID as a way also to save the information. So you have a trace of who did the transcription, whether it is you, yourself as the researcher, or is it a professional service or online. So again, it's a way of putting some traceability of who did what. Now we come to another useful thing to think about is content. So think about recording. Are you recording verbatim? So recordings should be transcribed verbatim, recorded word for word, as exactly said. So this is typically the case with qualitative interviews. Or are you omitting certain things and why? Again, this is something for you to consider. Are you including, think about any background sounds. As mentioned before, laughter, police sirens going on in the backgrounds, disruptions, people talking, a child perhaps sitting, and so on. And think about how are you going to include these nonverbal sounds. For example, maybe you could use, maybe these could be typed in parentheses, as you type in the actual interview. So you indicate that there are certain disruptions that were happening at the same time. Think about mispronounced words. For example, I gave the example here of a participant who said Pacific, but meant to say specific. So maybe think about, and this is a suggestion of how you can address this mispronounced words in your transcription. But think about other things as well, like, for example, any foul language, slang, grammatical errors, misuse of words or concepts. If an incorrect or unexpected pronunciation results in difficulty understanding the text, how are you going to incorporate or write the correct word? So again, I gave the example here on the slide of something or a way to deal with this. Any common phrases that participants use, and you'll come across this very often. All of us, we tend to shorten words. So we tend to use gotta instead of going to, have to, couldn't, shouldn't, kinda, and so on, or abbreviations. So think about any of these blended or compound words, any common phrases, identifiers. Are you going to standardize these across transcripts, correct them, and how are you going to deal with them? Filler words, another very common thing that you'll see in interviews. For example, huh, nah, oh, aha, and so on. Are you going to include these? Are these going to be transcribed? Because they indicate, and sometimes for people, they could be important because they could indicate a person is thinking, unsure, and so on, or not understanding the question. So it could be useful for people, or it could maybe indicate things like, for example, trauma, and so on. And so it could be important to you, depending on what you're after and what type of study you're doing. Any cutoff words, truncated words perhaps that you come across. For example, he went instead of he went. So maybe you could use a hyphen. So that could be useful in this scenario as a way to deal with any cutoff words or truncated words. Other stuff to consider as part of the content of the transcripts. If you come across difficulty to decipher, or if there are any inaudible segments, how do you deal with them? So I included here an example of how you can deal with those between brackets. So you could indicate, and you can write inaudible segment, 2 minutes of interview missing, as an example. So think about the portions of the recordings, if there are any inaudible or difficult to hear parts of your recordings, and how you will deal with these very hard to decipher or inaudible sections. Crosstalk, which I mentioned before. You can use, again, this between brackets, crosstalk, as a way to indicate that there was a crosstalk that was happening between two participants, multiple participants, or between the interviewer, yourself, and the participant, if you are speaking at the same time, and hard to distinguish who was saying what. Think about poses, short poses, long poses. Both of them are different. Think about ways of translating these in your transcripts. So you can use ellipses, for example, 3 dots for short poses. Or you can use, for example, what I've included in here as a suggestion on the slide of long pose. You write long pose in between brackets to indicate that there was a long pose in a special segment of the recording. Do you have any questionable text that you're not sure about and you can't transcribe? Here is a suggestion of how you can include questionable text. So you can use question marks between brackets of specific words that you couldn't understand. And finally, you can also, another thing to think about is replacing participant's name with an ID. That would be very important throughout the transcript. Now, storage of recordings and your audio tapes, another thing that is very important. Do you have a management plan to follow? Perhaps there is a management plan by your university, institute, organization, place of work. So it's important to check that. Check if there is any management plan to follow for storing recordings and audio tapes, because you have to follow these protocols. Again, related to that, any protocols that you need to follow in terms of security, in terms of naming it, perhaps, in terms of places to store recordings. Think about storing your recordings in multiple places. And I know this sounds very common sense, but it's amazing how many times we forget to save, and because of time pressures and you're doing multiple interviews at the same time. Be very regimented about how you store and also where you store your data, making sure every single time and you make the time to store your recordings and audio tapes as soon as possible after the interviews in multiple places, the places that you agreed and you thought about beforehand, whether it is online, whether it is on a password protected, for example, USB, a locker, and so on. Think about IT and security. Think about, for example, I wanted to use a USB that is password protected, but so I consulted our IT specialist person within the institute, within the university, who was able to deal with that. So perhaps think about any IT issues, any security. Are you saving your recordings, for example, on OneDrive, and so on? And related to that, as I mentioned, is the who has access to OneDrive. So is it yourself? Could it be your supervisors? So you give access to them through, say, OneDrive or another storage facility, online storage facility, and making sure that nobody goes through or is able to access the data, and the place is secure. Think about things like the location of your recordings. So where is your USB located? Is it located in a locker? Is your computer where data could be stored in it, is it located in a locker, and so on? Another important thing to consider as part of your transcript protocol is accuracy of information. So think about transcriptions from third parties or websites. Are you checking these against original? This is crucial. Straight after getting the transcripts from third parties or websites, everyone should be checking these transcripts and their accuracy while you listen to the recordings against the original. Also think about the storage and security and communication of the transcripts if you are doing these by third parties. Are these third parties known? Perhaps are they approved by your institute, by the university? Have they been used before? How did they deal with the data? All of these things sound very, very mundane to do, but they're crucial because you don't know you might have very sensitive information that could implicate and affect people and participants. So you need to be very careful and treat them as your own throughout, and think about the storage. Where are these transcriptions, recordings are being stored by the third party? By third-party services or websites, and that are offering transcription services. Are their security up to date? If you are in doubt, always ask them. How are they communicating? And is there a person to communicate with if things go wrong? If the person disappears, who's the transcriber, and so on. So think about all these things. Are they sure about how they're handling the storage and security of your data? Maybe perhaps something that you can teach them, something that you can instruct them to do. And I would highly suggest sending an email detailing how you would like your transcripts to be handled. And in terms of, which I've done personally with multiple services, really detail how you would like your transcripts to be stored, IT security of your data, and so on. And if there are any issues, I would suggest picking up the phone, speaking with the person or the service, or communicating your any concerns straight away to the manager or somebody else. Also think about another thing really that is most people would do after their interviews is to whether you want participants to verify your transcripts and perhaps even go the extra mile and suggest that they edit and they add or subtract or do anything, because it's their information by the end of the day. This is not about you. They gave you the information, so you need to be very respectful of any change of opinion all of a sudden. If they wanted to change information, perhaps remove certain information from the record, from the transcripts. But at the same time, you have to be ready to take in any implications from that. Now we've come to another important aspect to consider in transcription protocols is transcription file name or file names of transcripts. So choose a specific format to name each transcript you finish or you do. I gave here an example. You could use the pseudonym that you've chosen or an ID, sample ID. And you could say formatted interview transcript or unformatted interview transcript, and then date plus the date of the interview. Again, this is something up to you. This is just a suggestion, as long as, again, it's consistent. Just make sure that the transcript file, and you stick to a very consistent transcription file name. File backup. So consider backup of your files, any hard drives, online. As mentioned before in another slide, it's important to back up your files in multiple places all the time, ensuring consistency. And also think about what type of files that you're formatting, you're backing up. Think about the formatted, as well as the unformatted files. Also think about, perhaps another place that could be useful to save your files is in Vivo, but that could be, again, that's up to you. I use the de-identified files to do my data analysis over there. So this is not a recommendation, really. It's more of think about just where are your files. This is more about you to think about where did you save the files, where are the files exactly, so you can trace them. Are they in softwares like in Vivo? Is there a copy saved there for analysis? Are they on hard drives? Are they online? And so on. Last very important thing that most may forget is what happens to your transcripts and recordings once you leave. If you're leaving your institute, your university, or even ceased to work on your research project or research study, think about, and it's important to consider, what happens to your data if you leave. For example, can you transfer, and do you have to transfer responsibility to maybe perhaps your principal supervisor, the project manager? So they have responsibility because some of the data may have to be available for up to 5 years, if not even more than that. So think about, after you leave, who has got the responsibility to look after the data as well as access the data, who has worked on the project itself. Another thing that may be required, or something to think about, is to create a data archive detailing all the information about the data, where the data are stored, who has got responsibility for the data, and so on. And the dates perhaps of the data, how many are there, what type of files you've got, and save these at your institute before you leave. So hopefully this gave you an idea about the importance and how crucial it is to create a transcription protocol for qualitative interviews before you start your interviews.